Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is David Cox, and I'm the host of the New America Movement. We thank you so much for tuning into our show today. Let me start by saying it's always good to have my co-host with me, Jordan. Jordan, say hello.
What's going on, everybody? How y'all doing this evening?
Oh, we got a great show today, don't we, son?
Oh, it's going to be a good one.
We got some interesting things because, we live in the state of South Carolina, and our residence is here in Pickens County. Mm-hmm. And, we talk about politics all over the country. We love beating up the left on places like California and New York, Chicago, places where obviously the left do their best work. But what's interesting is things even in the South are beginning to change. There seems to be a new breeze blowing through the air, through our community, that kind of alarms a lot of parents in our district, in our state in South Carolina. And we've talked about critical race theory time and time again on this show. So, I could give you a much longer definition on it, but just in theory, that's pretty much beating up on white people and saying that we are privileged and minorities are not. Now, we know that's not the case. We know that was at one time because slavery existed in this country for several hundred years, but that's over with. And we hope that we were at a new dimension in life where we could move on and bind together, erase color, and hope for a better day for all of us. But it seems like the left just keep bringing this up through Black Lives Matter, Antifa, and now CRT, and it just seems like there's this massive division in our country. And it's almost to the place to where they're trying to creep into our school systems, our elementary schools, so they can train this new group of students to think racist, to think about how white people may be the problem and we may be victimizing minorities in this country. So the show today is going to be interesting. And let me just say, Jordan, what do you think? Jump in real quick.
First of all, I want to elaborate on the critical race theory thing that you said. Critical race theory is a cross-disciplinary, intellectual, and social movement of civil rights scholars and activists who seek to examine the intersection of race, society, and law in the United States, and to challenge mainstream American liberal approaches to racial injustice and racial justice. So the problem I have is when you say that we've seen this over in liberal cities, Chicago, we've seen this in New York, California, but now we're starting to see this in South Carolina, and not just South Carolina. We're seeing it in Pickens County. And so it's been in South Carolina for a while. In Charleston, it's flooded with critical race theory and books and people pushing this stuff. But now it's at our doorstep in Pickens County.
We're going to be talking to a couple of very interesting people here in our county. First of all, it is Amanda Hollinsby. I guess I got that right. And her friend Jessica Martin and Jenny McJunkin. These are citizens of Pickens County who have their kids in the school districts in here in South Carolina in Pickens County. And something interesting happened this week that sort of raised the eyebrows to a lot of people. I have a book in my hand. I'm going to hold it up and let you look at it. It is one of New York's bestsellers, and it is called Stamped: Racism, Anti-Racism, and You. Because I have some issues with it. It's presented in our school system as literature. It's not a part of your basic curriculum, but it is a part of literature that kids are reading. And what's happening to them, they're getting a heavy dose, in my opinion, of critical race theory. And there's a lot of things in it that would just make you think that this is just dividing our community up. Jordan, what do you think? Is it? What do you think?
1,000%. Ibram X. Kendi may be one of the most racist human beings ever walked the earth. He is extremely racist. He has another book that says How to Be an Anti-Racist, where he states the only remedy to past discrimination is present discrimination. The only remedy to present discrimination is future discrimination, which literally means racism forever. But somehow, some way in his mind, he's taking this and saying, well, this is how you are to become an anti-racist. Just the author of the book should give people pause and say, should my kids be reading this?
Interesting. Well, let me move on and say to our guests, we're so delighted to have you on our show today. This is Amanda, Jessica, and Jenny, and we just appreciate you taking out time to share on our podcast some thoughts that you have. Amanda, You have a child in Pickens, in one of the schools in Pickens.
I do.
I want you to talk to us about what came about, how this book came about, and how you became alarmed about it. So go ahead and just, first of all, share with the audience a little something about you, and then tell us how you got a little bit fired up over this book.
Okay. Well, my family and I moved here a year ago from Chicago, and I felt like we were escaping things such like this, critical race theory being introduced into the schools, a lot of liberal agenda, and I didn't want to be a part of it anymore, and I did not want to raise my children in an environment like that. So we chose South Carolina, knowing that it was a red state, and we chose the upstate, knowing that it was a very conservative area. And I did my research, and I specifically chose Daniel High School because it gets excellent reviews. So perhaps I got a little too comfortable. I sent my kids there, and I breathed a big sigh of relief. I'm out of Chicago. My daughter was getting ready to go to school, not yesterday, but a week before Monday. And she showed us this book, my husband and I, and a piece of paper that accompanied it. And I recognized that this book is very controversial, and I knew, based on what I had heard, that it dealt with critical race theory. And I said, oh, no. You're not reading that book. You're not taking that with you to school today. I need to read that book and the piece of paper from the teacher that accompanied it. So my first red flag was when I read the paper that the teacher wrote up. It said, and I'm going by memory here, it said this book is not a history book. It's not the opinion of this teacher or the county. But what this book is one man's opinion and perspective on what actually happened in this country. So that got me thinking, why are we reading a book about one man's perspective and his opinions when she says it's not a history book, but then she says it's about what actually happened? That seemed contradictory to me. And then in the write-up, on that piece of paper, she was explaining that her and her husband, like many parents, are very concerned that their children may be exposed to thoughts and ideas that perhaps they're not ready for, or we as parents don't want them exposed to. But they need to be exposed to these things, so she was taking it upon herself to introduce these topics to our children. It wasn't a permission slip that I could sign. It was basically telling me that this book was being assigned. And she did say, if you have a problem with it, contact me, please. And I did.
So who did you contact, the teacher?
I did. Well, first I called the principal because I wanted to ask if there was a list of approved reading material for the school district of Pickens County that teachers have to choose their supplemental reading material from. And initially, the principal told me that, yes, there was a list, but it was being revamped. It needed to be updated, and an updated version isn't available yet. And I asked him if he could please find out if this book was on the existing outdated list of approved material. And he said he would look into that. And I asked him if he was familiar with this book, and he told me no. He had not read the book, and he said, but I will commit my evening to reading it, and I'll call you back tomorrow morning, which he did. And when I asked him, when he called me back, did you read the book? Yes, I did. I said, what did you think? Did you enjoy it? And he said, yes, it was well worth my time. I enjoyed it very much. It's a great book for sparking discussion in the classroom. And my jaw dropped. And I asked him, you didn't take issue with historical inaccuracies or the fact that it might be considered critical race theory? And he didn't see it that way. And I asked him for an in-person meeting, and he agreed. And we met a few days later. But in the meantime, I did schedule an appointment to meet with the teacher. So I met with her, I believe it was about 2 days after I spoke to the principal on the phone.
Obviously, this is a very divisive book. I would say that just looking at the indiscrepancies in it, the lack of historical facts, would be enough for me to say to a student that nothing in here you really can rely upon because there's so much data in it that's simply wrong. And the accuracy of the historical documents in here are very misleading. And the idea that as you read this book with other students and you have an open discussion about it, it's very hard to assume that you would have this fair balance where both sides could look and view.
What discussion would you have?
Well, I'm like you. The only discussion you could have is if you read the book and you got into a forum with a bunch of students, is that white people are bad people. White people.
That's Ibram Kendi to a T. I mean, it's so just about like what you said, like when the teacher or principal, whoever you talked to, said, I read it and this can spark good discussions. About what? Do you really think that a 14 to 16 year old is going to sit here and have a discussion about race and them act like they're racist and that they need to not be racist when they're sitting across from someone that's another color than them that they've been friends with for, I don't know, maybe their whole life or maybe since they got into high school? So what discussions are you trying to prompt here?
You could not have a fair, balanced discussion on this. I think the obvious is that it would lead to an assumption that white people have a privilege over black people. And that is the whole crux of how CRT is built. It is that the white guy has a privilege that minorities do not have in this country. And most people in America would say that that is a very unfair statement to make as any citizen in this country. Now, I want to ask you a question. Did you read the book?
I did. I read it with a very critical eye. I read it slowly, and I took copious notes while reading it.
Okay, here's the thing now. What did you read in this book that would make you think it mirrors CRT?
Well, one of his main concepts in this book is that he states that we need to acknowledge America's racist past, which then leads us to acknowledge that America has a racist present. And that is the definition of systemic racism. And the rest of the book seems to be based off of that theory. He says towards the beginning of the book, I'm going by memory, so my quotes might not be exact, but he says that basically racism is everywhere. He describes different people. Some might think that racism is an extinct beast of the past. Some might think that, yes, it's still around, but it's not that prevalent. But then there are those of you who know racism is everywhere. He's very manipulative. I heard a great term regarding Kendi that I think is very apropos. He's a gaslighter. He has such an incredible manipulative way of twisting facts and writing things that apparently the principal, a grown man in education for, I'm presuming, decades, didn't pick up on. How are high schoolers going to pick up on this?
I think the thing that concerns me is that does mirror CRT. The thing that I would point out is if you're a student reading this in a group of kids with other students, and it's mixed, blacks and whites, Latinos, how are you going to come out of that as a white person and say, well, I'm not racist? Because they're going to say, well, the book says you are. So what are you going to do about it? So does that not incite people to have a sense of division and a sense, and rather than building unity, it points to the failures of what they would say are white people and our inability to recognize our own racism. So I would take issue with that, because how could you frame that to kids? And I'm not so concerned about myself because I'm an adult. I can work through complicated issues, but most kids cannot. They're just going to follow the lead of other people because that's human nature. Right. And if you're asked that question in the classroom, are you racist? How do you think your kid would have to answer that?
It's a lose-lose. If you say
Absolutely.
you're not racist, they're going to call you a racist if you're white. If you say you are racist.
There was the violence.
No!
And today there was plenty of finger pointing.
Now, Jessica, you said that you have a student.
Jessica?
Jessica.
Okay.
You have a student. Your kid is in a public school system, and white, young male. Is he referred to as a racist by minorities?
Absolutely.
Just
Even-
expand on it a little bit.
He's been, just by being a more country kid, people just dub him as a racist. He's been called a racist by white kids, black kids, anybody. I mean, it's just the student body as a whole, and he's had different treatment from teachers as well. So this has been going on.
So what would make them call him a racist? Does he have a T-shirt that says "I only love white people," or does he have a Confederate flag? What would cite people to refer to him as a racist?
He wore a Trump flag as a cape to school one day. It was a Spirit Week. They had to dress up like a superhero. And he put a Trump flag on, and then he had a little picture that he glued to his shirt that had a picture of Trump, like he was Superman, but it was Trump. That was him. And he, at that point, became the racist of the school.
You get out and you create a crowd, and you push back on them, and you tell them they're not welcome.
Because he wore
A Trump flag.
a Trump flag.
So
Wow.
So real fast, like this is exactly what the author of this book wants. What her son deals with every day when he goes to school is exactly what Ibram Kendi wants. Let that sink in. This could be your kid. Would you be okay with this?
There's an article in, I believe, Fit News, and I believe the name of the article is stamped, South Carolina is teaching children to hate. And if you read that article, parents talk about this specific book being used in the curriculum. And after children read this book, they're calling each other names, slave owners, colonizers. Apparently, black kids are throwing crackers at the white kids, calling them crackers. Kids are afraid to go to school.
Now, real fast, let's just call it like it is. This is where we are in 2022. Let's call it like it is. The issues that are going on, and I can see that some of y'all getting emotional. I can see that some of y'all just want to scream. I would be the same way. If that was my kid, oh my Lord. So this is, like I said, exactly what they want. They want to get in there and divide the kids up. What they want is more kids to become liberal thinking than conservative thinking. And the best way to do that is to sneak in this little book, sneak in that little book, and then you have discussions about it. But as we see, these discussions are not really discussions. They're actually divisive and ripping students apart from each other.
They're actually training seminars.
Go ahead.
They're ways of allowing your child to conform to their ideology. Now, let me say this. One of the things that really bothers me is, and I may take a lot of hits on this, but I'm going to go ahead and say it. What did Hitler do to take the Jews out? He sent his youth, he sent his police force.
Got the youth, yeah.
To start twisting how the Jews were manipulating the government little by little, day by day, week by week, month by month. Hitler used his ideology to convince people through divisive means such as this.
And we look at him as one of the most evil men to ever exist.
And you see that ideology today because what's actually happening is the country isn't coming together because of these kinds of books. The country is being divided. It is almost like whites against blacks. It's almost like the North against the South, California against the South. It's a system that says this group of people in this region are better than this group because they have a more intellectual view of
That's
how the world
what
works.
they want.
But what about all of us that disagree with that? Or this
racist.
division that is coming in? Well, yeah, if you divide the world up, if you divide America up and say these people are racist and these people are not, and at some point in the future, how does that play out? I don't see that working, because the country, America, is about unity. When I read our Constitution, it's about the freedoms and rights of all people to express their opinions and their ideas and do what is best in the eyes of God as they see fit. But when you use a book like this to go into a classroom of kids and you say to those kids, let's have a discussion about it. Are you now, after you've read the book, do you feel like you're a racist? There's no way to answer that. There's no way for a kid in a high school or a junior high school to be able to come out of that and say, well, I'm not they're going to say they're a racist because the book already says they're racist. And other kids are going to say you're racist.
And we're not talking about adults, just so everybody knows. Hey, we're not talking about me. We're not talking about my dad. We're not even talking about the parents over here. We're talking about kids.
When you bring up about how Hitler went after the children, after their minds, this book, Stamped Racism, Anti-Racism, and You, is a watered-down version of a book that I believe is more at the university level called Stamped from the Beginning that you referenced earlier. Then there's this version that I just mentioned. Then there's another watered-down version that is appropriate, so they say, for younger children in elementary school. And there's even a version of this book for parents to teach them how their babies are racist.
So I'm glad you brought that up, because I have been saying from the start, from the very beginning of all of this, and y'all can go back and fact check this all you want to. This has never, what's going on in the world today is not for me and you. It's not for us. It's for our kids. What they care about is your kids. You may disagree with me politically, but if I can get your kid to agree with me politically and everything else, my ideology, then what is his kid's going to teach? What is her kid's going to teach? It's going to be, and so that way you literally steal the minds of kids. And their argument is, oh, well, you're just scared to let kids learn.
That is their argument.
That's the art. And it's like, no, that's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is the fact that this is super divisive, and this is not something that you learn. This is something that is being taught.
And the ultimate thing here is that they know the conclusion of this. They know the answer to it. Once you insert this into a classroom, it's not like they're going to say, oh, well, we have different opinions. I'll guarantee you, if you put 100 kids in a room and you let them all read this book, at the end of the day, if they're in an open session where they're talking about it, the higher-ups know the result of what is going to happen to these kids. They're all going to come out feeling like, well, maybe I'm a racist. Maybe I am a bad person. Maybe I think I'm better than everyone else. And that's just a horrifying conclusion to put into the mind of a small teenage boy or girl. I oppose that, and I think that kind of radicalization in our country has to stop. Then it has to stop with school boards. It has to start with school boards. It has to start with principals, superintendents, and leaders and state elected officials in this state that say, we are not going to allow this. Now, I want to ask you something. There's a proviso written by our legislation in the state of South Carolina that is actually law.
Yes.
I think there are 7 points to this.
There's 8 points.
Or 8 points. Thank you for correcting me. Now, I want to ask you this question. When you read the book, you did some research on it.
I did.
I had a chance to look at it. Do you think it violated the laws of our state by allowing kids to read this book? And if so, just expand on it. Both of you maybe would like to give some input on that, because I think our viewers would like to hear that.
I absolutely think that, I absolutely know that this book violates South Carolina Proviso 1.105. There are 8 concepts listed in that proviso. I will quote the 8 concepts of the Proviso 1.105. One race or sex is inherently superior to another race or sex. An individual, by virtue of his race, is inherently racist. An individual should be discriminated against or receive adverse treatment solely or partly because of their race. An individual's moral standing or worth is necessarily determined by his race. An individual, by virtue of his race, bears responsibility for actions committed in the past by other members of the same race. An individual should feel discomfort, guilt, anguish, or any form of psychological distress on account of his race or sex. All of these say race or sex, but we're talking about race today. So meritocracy or traits such as hard work ethic are racist or sexist, or were created by members of a particular race to oppress members of another race. And the final one, fault, blame, or bias should be assigned to a race or sex or members of a race or sex because of the race or sex. And I would encourage any South Carolinian that plans on doing research and reading this book, have a copy of this proviso in front of you and frequently look at it, refer to it as you're reading the book. I think that you will come to the same conclusion that I did, that there are a multitude of occasions in this book that it violates this proviso.
An individual, by virtue of his race or sex, bears responsibility or actions committed in the past by other members of the same race or sex. Then number 6 is, this is the one that I really thought was on it. An individual should feel discomfort, guilty, anguish, or any other form of psychological distress on account of his race. Do you think that your kid felt discomfort, guilt, anguish, psychological distress, or any of that?
Potentially, these students will have animosity or fear or discomfort or feelings of racism towards each other. So I don't know what discussions have taken place. I cannot say that my daughter felt like she was responsible for any racism that happened in the past or that is happening now. But I don't want it to get to that.
Absolutely. And the reason I bring that up is because that's the discussion.
That's the goal. That's
the discussion right there.
Right, exactly. So the peer pressure, I think that's the word you're looking at. When you put 10, 12, 20, 30 kids in a room and you're discussing a subject, there are going to be people that lead that discussion who have an end goal. They want everyone to feel like, who are white, that they are the victimizer and that minorities are the victim. That's the goal. That is what CRT is about, and that's what this book is about. So how could you read this book and not come to that conclusion? And is that not leading people into thinking a way that is not a free choice, but is manipulated by a government institution? Now, I'm going to ask Jenny to jump in on this because she's been a little bit quiet. Tell us what you think about this.
I was going to say what Jordan just said, that yes. How are the children that opt out of the book, how are they perceived? One of my children, I'm not going to get specific, opted out of a book last year in elementary school that had, he immediately came to me with it and said, "Hey, Mom, I don't think I need to read this book." I'm not going to get into specifics because we were blessed with a wonderful teacher who immediately contacted me. She said, "Oh, goodness, I hadn't read this book in so long. I didn't even remember that was in there. Of course he doesn't have to read it. I'll assign him." And there was another student that wanted to read a different book. They read a different book and nothing happened. It was fine. They break up into smaller reading groups in elementary school, so it wasn't a big deal. But I can imagine higher up when all the students in the classroom are not broken up into smaller reading groups, that you're going to run into well, why don't you want to read the book? That must mean that you're racist, or that you have a problem with XYZ.
I raised 2 kids, and what do we always ask you moving home? What did you learn? What did you talk about? And if something that popped up that alarmed us, well, we would weigh in on it. What do you think?
No, absolutely. And I love the fact how she brought up her kid, and this was in elementary school, and there was a book that she was like, "I don't think my kid," and the kid came and said, "Look, I don't think I should be reading this." That's amazing. But to your point, when you get higher up to where so first off, this is where they want to start with kids in elementary school. That's where they want to start. Okay, so they're going to do the whole race and transgender and sex and gender this, gender that in elementary school a little bit. Then the older you get, the more you get of it. The more the deeper it kind of gets. And then just like to your point, you get up to where you're in high school to where you can actually have conversations. And these teachers are going to put together kids who read the book, who didn't read the book, who didn't even want the book in there, kids who did want the book in there. And that's a recipe for disaster. Why would you want to even remotely set your classroom up for failure like that? Like, if you know as a teacher that this is going to be divisive, I'm going to have kids not want to read this, but screw them kids.
Well, I identify as genderqueer, but I'm super feminine. I suppose if we educated people more inside schools, especially at a young age, that we could do a lot more good.
Efforts for African American students and other students of color and what Bettina Love calls dark folks. So it leaves us out of the question. Oh, you must know how to do hair. You got your cosmetology license, but you never touch black hair. And over 75% of white people, according to a recent study, do not have one black person in their immediate circle, which means they're out of touch with what it means to be black in this world. And so these teachers get in the classroom and provoke implicit bias. And so their innocence becomes their guilt.
Because the kids that want to read it, I'm going to let them read it, and then we're going to talk about it. You're excluding the people that don't want to read it because their ideology, their belief system is the complete opposite. You can't even sit here and physically say what's racist and what's not because you've changed the definition so many times, but you want my kid to learn about it. How can you make this a part of your curriculum whenever the South Carolina state law says this should never be in there to begin with?
Despite Proviso 1.105, basically stating that any book that espouses what this book specifically espouses should never be taught in South Carolina schools.
And so you sneak it up in there and make it a thing where people can just choose to do it. But whenever that happens, what do you think? Why would you set yourself up like that? Because you know, as a teacher, you are going to have kids not read it. You're going to have parents that are going to be upset about it just by the author. The author is one of the most racist people ever. Just by the author, they're going to be like, no, my kid's not reading this. As a teacher at this high school, what gives you the right to do that?
Well, here's the question I have. And I want to ask you as parents, do you think that there are other forms of literature that are out there that kids could have open discussions on that are not this controversial?
I completely agree that you could have very important discussions. I can give you a specific example that happened when I was in high school. There was a class, it was a history class actually, wonderful, wonderful teacher, but she did a debate, and you were either in support of Catherine the Great or you were in support of Maria Theresa of the Austrian-Hungarian Empire. But you were supposed to support one side, and we got so passionate about it. We got so excited, and we were both, all of the class, we were out to prove that our side was the better, totalitarian ruler.
At the end of the day, did it really matter which side you were on? Because it didn't change anything socially, did it?
No, it didn't. It was just a fun way to critically think and evaluate history.
My point exactly. When you read this book, when you come to a conclusion, does it affect you socially? Jordan, what do you think?
Oh no, it absolutely does. This has nothing to do with our government. This is social constructs, just like gender is. Okay, so what they're trying to do, our government is pushing social constructs as if it's education.
There are many, many forms of literature out there that could replace this book that aren't as controversy.
Absolutely.
So reading this book certainly is going to divide up your classroom. It's going to divide up your school, and it certainly divides up America. The question I have is, it obviously violates our proviso, but you didn't get that opinion from a lot of educators. Am I correct? And if so, expand upon it.
That is correct. When I met with the teacher and the vice principal, I brought out 10 quotes from the book, and I told that both of them how those specific quotes violated specific concepts in the proviso.
Would you read one? Do you have one available that you could read to us?
Well, I can go by memory here.
Okay, go ahead. Share a couple of those quotes.
Well, one of the provisos states that you should not teach that meritocracy or hard work is racist. And in the book, he gives two examples. One was an 11-year-old child that got into Harvard and was the youngest of all time to get into Harvard. And he called him a nerd. And he said, and besides all of that, he was very religious. He knew he was special. At least he was meant to be. Now that right there, at the beginning of the book, he makes a statement. Now, keep in mind gaslighting. In the introduction of the book, he says, the only thing wrong with black people is that we think that there's something wrong with us. The only thing extraordinary about white people is that they think that there's something extraordinary about white people. He does, in that passage, say, him, the author, no one race is better than the other. I'm not racist. So when I first started reading the book, I thought, oh, okay, this book might be okay. Yeah. But then he gives example after example in the book where he contradicts himself. And when he called this 11-year-old child, he referred to him as knowing he was special, or at least he was meant to be. He was a white child. And he also was villainizing him for hard work ethic, called him a nerd because he got into Harvard. He also talks about Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas. And out of one side of his mouth, he accuses him of being a pick yourself up by the bootstraps kind of guy. And I believe he referred to him as the king of self-reliance. Villainizing him because he was a hard worker. And then out of the other side of his mouth, he says his activism is what got him into his fancy schools and his fancy job. Now, he also categorizes all people into either assimilationists, segregationists, or anti-racist. And how he defines an assimilationist is somebody who's trying to, for instance, a black person that's trying to act white to appease the white people. And he calls Justice Clarence Thomas an assimilationist of the worst kind. I think those are two examples right there.
The idea that there are all these white people in this country who think they're privileged people, most white people don't think that way, because most of us, even today, struggle trying to pay their bills, trying to survive, and just get through the week. So I don't know who these white people are talking about, because I don't know these special white people here in America. What do you think?
Well, and most black people don't believe that either. Like most black people don't believe that white people are superior to them. I mean, if you walk up to a black person and say, hey, do you think a white person is superior to you? They're going to look at you and say, heck no, you crazy. This is mostly a bunch of white liberals that are backing this stuff. Whenever you have stuff like this that comes out, these books, and they hit these classrooms, they are targeting not a specific race. They're targeting a specific age. They're targeting a specific person. Because if you can get a white person to feel that they're guilty for slavery, you've done your job. If you can get a black person to feel victimized for slavery, you've done your job. We as citizens of Pickens County need to stand up. And first of all, I'm gonna say this: I don't care who agrees or not. That teacher needs to go. If you think this is okay, you got no place in the public school system. You're creating a toxic classroom that is eventually gonna spill over into reality. You're gonna have fights. You're going to have all sorts of things going on.
Division is a very, very good way to destroy a country or to at least control a country.
And that's their objective.
That
I
is
believe.
always their objective. That is always objective.
I wanted to, when you say that's what I'm being accused of, I wanted to bring up, there apparently is a rumor going around that has even been brought to the board members and the administrators. And what is being said about me is I have 2 daughters at this particular high school. One is currently a junior, the other one is a sophomore. We were here last year as well. And what people are asking is, why didn't I have a problem with my older daughter reading this book last year when it was being taught by a white teacher? Now all of a sudden I have a problem with my younger daughter reading it this year when this book is being taught by a black teacher. My older daughter did not read this book last year. She was in English 3 honors class. That teacher did not use this book. They read The Crucible, Of Mice and Men, and The Great Gatsby. And, to be honest, I can't ever remember meeting my daughter's English teacher last year. I have no idea if she's black or white. I never asked my daughter, and it doesn't matter.
So you were being accused of this?
Yes.
Wow.
Okay, now moving on. What do you tell your kids about minorities in this country? I'd like for all 3 of you to answer that. And the reason I'm saying that is because this book assumes that you are telling your children that as a white person, you're better than black kids, and that you have privileges that they don't have, and that you're going to do better than them because of the color of your skin. Do you tell your kids that? If so, let's talk about that for a moment.
Those concepts actually have never come up in the raising of my children. We treat everybody equally. My children have never asked me if any race is better than another race. I've never indicated that any race or gender or...
Because what's known don't need to be said.
Yeah. Okay, well, what about you?
Well, certainly not. Race, I mean, it doesn't come up. I remember when my children were little and they were describing a friend and they were pointing them out, and it happened to be an African-American child. And they pointed him out. The kid in the blue shirt. The child didn't say that he was African-American. He said it's the kid in the blue shirt. Because it doesn't matter.
Okay, Jessica, what about you? What do you tell your children?
Well, to start with, we're actually not even from the South. We moved here from California. So where we're from, I mean, we actually, in our area, we were the minority. White people were. We were in a majority Hispanic area. So it was normal for my kids to be around other ethnicities. It wasn't new. And so when we moved here, you know, we didn't even have to talk about it. It was just, they're people, be nice to them. That's just what you do. And my son, the one that's a student at this high school, he's one of the most giving, loving people. He's a huge personality, and he's got friends of every ethnicity. It's never been something that we've had to sit down and talk about until he started getting called a racist. That's when we actually started having the conversations, because there was nothing that ever constituted it prior to that.
Interesting. Well, it's been a great show. Jordan, go ahead and wrap things up, and we'll slip off the air here in just a minute.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask one thing, and you can move the mic back if you want to. So you're from Chicago originally, right?
Yes, the northwest suburbs.
Okay, and you said you were from California originally, right?
Correct.
Okay, so we can all agree liberal states, right? Like
Yes.
very, 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 very liberal.
Yes.
Did y'all ever think for 1 second you'd be in South Carolina talking about this?
No. And to be honest, 10, 15, 20 years ago, even in a blue state, I wouldn't have imagined we'd be talking about this.
Yeah, and the reason I bring that up is because this for all you people out there that say, well, there's no CRT in South Carolina. It's not here. We got laws that protect against it. We got this, we got that, we got all this stuff, and it's not here. For all y'all out there that says that, this is living proof that it is. And you got living proof on how it not only affects the students in schools, but how it affects the parents. Okay, and I want to thank you guys so much for coming on and talking about this.
May I say one more thing,
Absolutely,
please?
absolutely.
I want to make sure people can hear me. Earlier, Jordan, you mentioned that the teacher needs to go.
Yes.
I can't say that yet.
That's
And
perfectly
let me explain to you why. And I want to say this because I love this county. Fifth, sixth generation in Easley.
Born and raised.
Yeah, fifth generation in Easley. I believe in this school district. I believe in these teachers. In fairness, this teacher may not have been ill-intentioned. She may have been naive or misguided or positive thinking enough that she really thought she was doing something helpful to help students in some way. I'm not sure how, but I'm not going to villainize her because heavens, our teachers are amazing. Our teachers work so hard. They deserve to be backed up until it's proven that there was ill will. You've seen school boards across the country, especially during the pandemic, where parents were shut up. They weren't allowed to speak. They were kicked. They were hauled out of school board meetings. Not in Pickens County. Not under our school board. Not under our superintendent. He sat there and listened to us. The school board sat there and listened to us. And we have been provided with the avenues that we need to take to address this in an orderly way that doesn't cause excessive disruption. So I just want to say we are not bashing the teachers. We are not bashing our school district. We are not bashing our principals. And I just felt I needed to say that.
Absolutely. That's our job. That's why we say stuff like that. That's our job. If this teacher does come out with proof that they knew what they were doing, then I will say all day on this show that they need to be removed. That's because we do that the reason we do that is because teachers like that think that this is okay and that they're doing it maliciously, and like you said, it very well could be where they thought I just really love this book and I'm just trying to help. And if that's the case, then by all means, I understand. I get it. Let's not let it happen again, and we'll all move on. But if it's found out that this is something that's being pushed, that's being that you know without a shadow of a doubt this is wrong, then I will stand on everything that I believe as a Christian, that this is totally against everything we stand for. And if you really believe that this is something that kids should be reading and you're pushing this, then this is what the podcast is for, is to get information out and everything. But I totally support what you said. Absolutely, 1,000%. You have to make sure that it is done maliciously. Absolutely.
And I do want to make a comment about my experience with this teacher. My gut feeling is that she's misguided. I don't know her very well, but what I do know of her, I think she's a lovely lady.
Well, thank you so much. Let me say, Amanda, Jessica, Jenny, we appreciate you being on our show. Thank you for standing up for what you believe in, because that's how we make a difference in this country. So once again, thank you so much, and maybe we'll cross paths again in the future. This is the New America Movement. Thank you for tuning in. We appreciate it. We'll see you next week.